This is Duke University.
Welcome, all of you. We're really fortunate to have our guests here today. As you know, the usual format of these sessions has been to have a foundation president. Today, we're really lucky to have not only the foundation president, but also the foundation chair. And so the discussion will be among the three of us about different aspects of the foundation. And of course, the rules of the game are that you can interrupt anytime you'd like to comment, question. But the Barr Foundation is, I want to say, the largest private foundation in Boston, but I'm not. That may or may not be correct. It's certainly one of the largest private foundations in Boston, which has been doing fascinating work in a variety of subject matter areas, which they will talk about. I told Jim Canales was, before he went to Boston, the Barr Foundation, he was the president of the Irvine Foundation in California, which focused on primarily, I think maybe exclusively, California activities. It also has the distinction, when he was there, to be one of the few foundations that prominently put on their website and announced that they had had a major program that failed, right?
That's right. We're not doing that at Barr, but we did do that at Irvine.
We don't fail.
In any event, as you all know, I criticize foundations often for not talking about their failures. So a foundation that not only talks about its failures, but is proud of the fact that it talks about its failures is something worth noting. And Jim has been at the Barr Foundation, I believe, since 2014. And has been, I read the reports of the Barr Foundation carefully now, and one of the things that I said to him in the office before we came here was, I was really struck by the fact that in talking about the Barr Foundation's programs, when they decided to increase the funding, expended in the arts, he said they thought long and hard about it because the fact that the arts are notorious for being areas of activity that are difficult to measure impact in. And he told me that, and he wrote in the report that they were not going to allow that to deter them, the inability to measure, to provide metrics on the impact of the arts to keep them from expanding the program. Indeed, they believe it's all the more important to do more work in the arts. So that frankness, freshness, and insight was, I think, really striking there. I talked to my class about it from time to time. Any event, so having Barbara Hostetter here, the president, the chairman of the board, and also co-funder of the Barr Foundation, is a particular privilege and treat.
Thank you.
We thank you for coming down here to talk with us. So you see around the table a mixture of faculty members and students, of nonprofit and foundation professionals, and people from Duke and Carolina who are engaged in donor relations of one sort or another, and an occasionally independent consultant as well. So having Barbara here means that we're going to be able to get a very interesting set of insights between CEO and board chair about how decisions get made, what kinds of things are focused on, and so on, which we would not get if we just had one of them. And so that's the way we've structured the program this afternoon. But it's, as I say, feel free to interrupt at any point. So let me just say that I didn't know that I invited Jim first, and he then came back and said, would it be all right if Barbara came with me? And I didn't know at the time that Barbara was a Duke parent.
Oh, since I'm coming. Yes. We have a son who's a senior at Duke.
That's exactly right. So we discovered that we not only have a board chair of this foundation, but a Duke parent who has been looking at the campus, thanks to Cam Kelly, this morning, maybe at other times as well. So welcome, Barbara. Thank you
Thank
so much for
you.
coming. Jim, thank you for coming back.
Delighted.
It's a pleasure having all of you, both of you here, and together is even better.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you
We're
very
very
much,
happy.
Joel. We're delighted to be here. And what we thought we would do by way of format today is that we would just make this a conversation. And there are a series of questions that I wanted to ask Barbara. I've always been dying to ask Barbara now for 4 years, so you're giving me the opportunity. And there are some questions that I think she's going to ask me as well, and then Joel can chime in, and all of you should chime in. But I think what I would add to Joel's introduction is that having been in another foundation and having observed philanthropy now for over 25 years of my career, I would say that the Barr Foundation is at a very interesting point in its evolution. And in fact, the title of the talk today about the evolution of the Barr Foundation is part of what we wanted to focus on. Obviously, there are always opportunities for you to talk to a foundation president or to talk to a foundation board chair. But I think what's unique is sort of where we are in that story. And I thought, therefore, I would start by asking Barbara to walk us through kind of the beginnings of this. Why she and her husband Amos created this foundation in the first place. We've now been around for about 20 years. What was the motivation to make that initial gift? And just help us understand the history, because then that sets the stage for part of what we want to talk about today in terms of the evolution and the particular inflection point we're at today. So Barbara.
So first, let me just say thank you all for coming, because I don't know why anybody would really come. I was wondering if anyone would show up. I don't know that we're all that exciting. Jim is the star of the show in our office, but we certainly are happy to be here and very, very humbled to be here with you today.
We're honored by
So
your
thank you
presence.
all. In some ways, I like to say I'm here through no fault of my own, because it was a husband who had a very successful career in cable television. Amos was one of the pioneers in the business. It was a very, very exciting time to be in the cable television. I don't know that it compares today with what we're going through. Anything could be that exciting, but at that time, the growth curve was straight up, and it was something that he loved. He loved his work, and I'm so proud of him for that, because there wasn't a day in his career that he didn't love going to the office. And it wasn't about making a lot of money. It was about building a product and providing services and working with people. And the end of it, as he could see that there would be a merger with the telecommunications industry, and you could see that way out front. And he began to talk about it, and it could be in a year, and it could be in 10 years, and it could be in 15 years. We began to think about what that meant philanthropically, because a lot of money had been amassed, and we lived a relatively modest lifestyle. We knew that philanthropy would be the important in our lives at that point, but we knew nothing about it. And Amos always liked to say to me, I'll do the investing and you can do the programmatic work. And I began fretting about it, because we had young children, and we really had a big growth curve in front of us. And he would look at me when I would fret, and he'd say, Barbara, it is not rocket science. And I'm not sure that was the most reassuring thing. And many years later, I would say he was right. It's not rocket science, but the difference is between giving your money away and giving your money away very strategically with hoping to have good impact. And that, it's maybe not rocket science, but it's not easy. It's not easy. So that was the very beginning. He did the investments, and I went upstairs, and I don't think I've ever worked that hard. We had a 2-year-old, a 7-year-old, and an 11-year-old at home, and we just figured it out. I hired consultants so that we didn't have to hire full-time staff. We worked, sort of made every mistake in the book, and it was as exciting as it was daunting and challenging. We worked very quietly and very anonymously, and that became more and more of an issue over time. So I think we felt early on that working anonymously would give us the bandwidth to be under the radar, although in retrospect, there's no such thing as being under the radar. As soon as you open a foundation, you're on the radar, even in Boston, where there wasn't a lot of philanthropy. So there were two foundations at the time. One was the Fidelity Foundation, and they were anonymous, and there was us. So when a grant was made, it was guessing which anon it was. And so those were the early years, and the early program areas. You know, it's one foot in front of the other. It's all about growing, and it's all about evolving. We started out giving money to education, which was largely public education. It was something we cared deeply about, something we thought we could and should do better at. Everything we did was in Greater Boston. We thought if we stayed in Greater Boston, it would allow us to keep a very lean number of people that worked for us ultimately, and it would keep the paperwork at a minimum, and we wouldn't have people getting on planes, and it all seemed to make a lot of sense. So we worked in education. In the public model, we worked, our environmental work was really in water, clean water, and sort of conservation and land. And then our arts work was mostly in the museum world.
And say a little bit about scale in terms of the size of the foundation when you started.
Oh, that's right. So we
started
started we started with probably a third of the assets from the sale of the company. We started the foundation with $300 million. In 1997, in today's dollars, it is 2.7.
1.7.
1.7 plus the grant making that we've made,
Right.
which is 900. So we've had good investors. My husband did his job really well downstairs.
I want to come back to this point about anonymity, because just to speak to it, and obviously it's a topic Joel knows very well from his work. So Barr was anonymous for roughly the first decade of its existence, up until about 2007, 2008. And I want to ask Barbara to talk a little bit about the decision to not have the foundation be anonymous, because that was a big decision for the foundation. And then maybe a little bit about taking us then into the current situation that then led to what brought me here.
Okay, so being anonymous, it's in the beginning, it felt important, as I said, because we had a big learning curve. We didn't want to do it in public. You do stumble around, and we also had young children. So with young children at home, and we really wanted our children to be normal, and we just weren't prepared. We were private people, we were modest people, we just weren't prepared to be out there, and so it seemed like the right thing to do. What happened over time, and I think what happens naturally over time, is that as the work became better and better, and our staff grew, the kids aged, and our confidence was increasing, it felt more comfortable, and it felt important to leverage the work by standing behind the work with our name. It felt important to let the staff take credit for the work that they were doing. There was a point in time when I realized that we had no historical record of the work we had done because we were so anonymous. Nobody was writing anything down. And so it was easy for other people to step in and take credit for it. And so it was really, a time when you're getting a little bit more comfortable, a little more competent, a little bit more comfortable with taking risks, a little bit more passionate about the things that you care about. And then came Jim Canales, and I think you really led us through. I think one of Jim's Jim has brought many, many gifts to the foundation, but one of the greatest has been an openness, a transparency. Probably the mistakes that he used to admit to on the Irvine website has changed. The language around that has changed a little. So today he talks a lot about transparency, and he talks a lot about being transparent and open in every way. And he's brought great skill in communications to the Barr Foundation. So he's taught us a lot about social media. He's taught us a lot about communications, how to manage the press, and with that came a stepping out and a trust in doing that.
Was there a particular point when you decided not to be anonymous anymore? And if so, what was it?
I think it was it the climate change work?
Mm-hmm.
I think it was when we committed this was the biggest grant we had made. We made a $50 million grant over 5 years to climate change, and at that point I think we felt very passionate about the work that had to get done, and we knew that it would be the right thing to do to use our name with it. So, yeah.
So I would say what's interesting and what I would like us to talk about for a few minutes as well is, so if you get the story of the foundation's early stages, 10 years of anonymity, then 6-7 years of operating around the issues that they care about, a particular focus on climate, then the executive director retires from her role, and Barbara is deeply involved in the work of the foundation. And we should also note, incidentally, that up until that time, there are 2 trustees of the foundation, Amos and Barbara. And that's it in terms of the governance of the institution. So as we get to where we are now and we look at 2014, I might ask Barbara to just say a few words about the thought process that she and Amos were going through to begin to think about the next stage of the foundation. And then I can talk a little bit about the work we have done in the intervening time, because I think there are pieces of the work that we've now done together that I think describe a particular foundation at a particular moment in time.
So the 2014, meaning when we're bringing the search, when we bring the president in. So I would describe that time as, a learning and growing and very young foundation. I mean, this whole story is about a very young foundation. At this point, we're 20 years. So I hope it'll be around for a very long time. It's set up to be right now in perpetuity, but those decisions are also flexible so that future generations can change that. I would describe that period of time as sort of an adolescence, a feeling like an adolescence. We were sort of getting our feet grounded. The work was getting better. The staff was getting stronger. We were struggling with the anonymity thing, but coming along. And our second executive director was stepping down, and it felt like the right time to bring in somebody who could really, really take this and run with it and take it to the next level. I think we probably could have done that a little sooner, but it didn't feel, I don't know that we could have brought Jim Canales into the Barr Foundation before we did. It was a hard sell as it was. He made it very difficult.
Well, I'll talk about that too.
He'll talk about that. But it was time for me to step down and to bring in a president, not an executive director, to bring in our third trustee, and so we started a national search. And Jim was identified very early in the search from California, and I guess I'll let you tell that story. But he brought the sort of the systems change, if you will. It was when Jim came that we sat down and really restated the mission, really looked hard at values, he helped us articulate, I think, things that were very much a part of the culture and a part of who we were, but had not been expressed as such.
So he didn't bring any of the California climate.
He did not bring the California climate.
That is true. I brought the worst winter that Boston ever had, the first winter I was there. Just to pick up the story where Barbara left off, so to step into a foundation, and very different incidentally, so the Irvine Foundation had been around for 75 years when I was there. It was a board of 13 individuals. There were no family members on the board. And in fact, when people knew that I was considering this opportunity, they said, why would you go work for a family foundation? Family foundations are rife with complications, and you've got it great with a board that doesn't have those dynamics. And what I would say is, arriving at the Barr Foundation, what I realized is what a singular opportunity this was to help Barbara and Amos, and be a partner with Barbara and Amos, to think about what the next stage of evolution for this foundation can be. And to put a tagline on it, what we have talked about is essentially Barr transitioning from a family philanthropy to a legacy foundation. And that is effectively the headline of the work that we've been doing together in the 4 years that I have been there, is how is it, and as Barbara pointed out, we started with getting very clear about the values that Barbara and Amos cared about, the values that they wanted to animate the work of this foundation. Yes, you can make decisions about what programs you want to focus in, what geography do you want to do you want to be perpetual or not. Those are all important decisions. But at base, it was critical to me to really get, if you will, the DNA of this institution pinned down so that as it becomes a legacy foundation, as it evolves beyond engagement of the family, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, somehow we don't lose that important element of the values that Barbara and Amos wanted to infuse the work of the foundation. That's been absolutely critical, as you can imagine. And so literally in the first 6 months, we spent a lot of time, the three of us, literally just the three of us, together, no consultants, no one else mediating these conversations, talking about this and iterating, going back and forth. And the culmination of that was a set of values, a new mission statement, decisions about the areas we were going to focus in, which are the areas you see on the slide of arts and creativity and education and climate, and a decision to move the foundation to more of a regional focus from what had been principally a Boston-centric focus to the foundation. So all of those decisions were made within the first 6 to 9 months, and obviously working with the staff to then move those decisions to the next stage in terms of new plans for each of the areas, which we can get into as we move into the Q&A. But I want to spend a few minutes with Barbara talking about governance, because it is a unique governance structure to arrive to 2 trustees. It's a unique governance structure to then expand to 3 trustees, one of whom is the president of the foundation, and talk a little bit about what we have done in the intervening time. And maybe I'll ask Barbara to say a few words about how we've thought about the evolution of the foundation as it relates to its governance, because this is a unique set of decisions that I think we've made.
So it has been a great journey, and we did start out with the 2 of us. When Jim joined, he was the 3rd trustee. It was welcome to the family office. It was a I don't know how to describe the first generation of a foundation. You probably can do it better than me, and you're laughing. And I have to laugh at ourselves too, because it's quirky. It's one of the most special times that there will ever be in this foundation, and I fully appreciate that. And yet there's also this really important need to professionalize and to move forward and to prepare for future generations and future governance. And you have to think about that, and it's not the most natural thing to think about because there's no precedent. So you're thinking about a family that doesn't exist yet, so it's tricky. But we're on our way. We have added 2 trustees this year. I think part of the decision in the strategic planning that we did with Jim was that the Barr Foundation would be a legacy foundation, that we wanted there to be seats on the board for children or for family members, but not a control. So if we ultimately end up with a board of 12, we might have 3 or 4 slots for family, but that it would continue to run as a professional organization over time and tackle some of the big systemic issues which we felt would be best in the hands of a professional staff. So that decision was made. We added our first 2 trustees. We added our first trustee with Jim. We added our next 2 trustees just this year. We have just had our second meeting with them. One of them was actually sick, so we've had, one of them is on the board of advisors at the Nicholas School at the Duke, at Duke, Sue Tierney. whose work has been in climate. But important in our it took a long time to actually be brave enough to go out there and add trustees. That's another very big moment for us. And the decision to add trustees was very closely aligned to the work that we had done on our values and closely aligned to our mission, so that although Sue's background is in climate, which is distinguished, what we were really looking for in our trustees were generalists, were people that had a wide range of experience, who understood the not-for-profit, who had distinguished themselves in their careers in some way, but didn't necessarily have an expertise in the program areas that we were working in. That was not a prerequisite.
And in fact, we made a conscious decision to talk as abstractly as possible about the qualities and attributes that we wanted from new trustees before we started talking about people, and then made another conscious decision that we weren't going to do what the natural tendency might be, which is to go immediately to people who are already part of a trusted circle, but rather try to think in a much more expansive way about people in the community or outside of the community who met these qualities and attributes, who we thought would be a good fit for this, particularly for this first set of trustees for the foundation. And so both Sue Tierney and Lee Pelton, who's the president of Emerson College, who have now joined us, are people that we've known about and have interacted with in some form, but they're not people who are deeply known to the three of us. And in some ways, I think that's important as well, because it's not about going immediately to the people, again, that are in your circles, and could potentially then you run the risk of, because of other relationships, they're deferential to your perspective, and while you want them, you want outside voices, you also want outside voices that are ideally going to bring objectivity, bring clarity, and potentially bring different perspectives to the conversation. And that's indeed what has happened, and it's been enormously helpful. I want to also focus on this decision that Barbara and Amos made, because I think it's an important one. This decision that as we expand the board will always have a majority of non-family trustees. That's a big decision, and it's not a decision that you often see in family foundations as they're making this evolution. And so that is a decision that we've made. And while we've made the decision that ideally there will be opportunities for family members to be engaged, another decision that I want to ask Barbara to say a few words about is that we don't see Barr as the sole place where family members can exercise their own philanthropic interests. And that's an important dynamic as well. And so maybe Barbara can speak to how she and Amos on the personal side have thought about that aspect of it in terms of their own family and their opportunities for philanthropic engagement.
I'm happy to. The only other thing I would have meant to say to you about adding governance and adding trustees was it has already changed the dynamic in the room. There definitely needed to be a time that we were ready for that, but the dynamic in the room goes from you being the only trustees and having a staff of people who are kind of hanging on to every word you say. We think they're the smartest people in the room. They think we're the smartest people in the room. And there were too many of them and too few of us. And we were looking for some balance. We understood that, for the Barr Foundation to be successful was not about us being the smartest people in the room, because there was no way. We were tackling really big and very difficult issues. There's nothing easy about climate change. There's nothing easy about public education. And in fact, our strategies have changed significantly from those early days. And so, the whole hire the right people, hire the smartest people you can, align them with your culture and your values, and then really let them go is the model of how we work at the Barr Foundation. And Amos will always remind Jim and me not to hire too many. He's a lean and mean. So it is a sensitive decision to make these decisions on behalf of your children who are not as engaged yet because of their ages, on whether they want to, whether they, what the board dynamics or how many seats on the board families should have. we talked to a lot of people. I remember having the Rockefeller brothers in the room one day and hearing over and over how much regret there was in that family. And this is something they say publicly, that was not the case at the Rockefeller Foundation, that those decisions were made and the family it was left out of that. So it is a sensitive decision. In our case, we do have other opportunities for the family. There will be, and this is a little bit of the work that Jim and I and Amos will be doing now going forward, is figuring out the next generation of the family in philanthropy and what kind of philanthropy is appropriate, how much they're interested in it, and setting up the kind of family office that will allow for them to practice philanthropy. And we're working with Tom Tierney at Bridgespan, who I know you've worked so closely with, and he's been very, very helpful. And I think our goal is to find a way to create philanthropic opportunities for the family that's different, that's not about setting up a foundation, that's not about making grants, that's a little bit more spontaneous, working on initiatives, working with not necessarily building a big, heavy staff load of people. And it's a work in progress, but if anybody feels badly that my children are not going to be controlling the Barr Foundation, we are here to reassure you that there's lots of opportunity for them.
And I would say, I think what's unique about this is, I think if you observe many other family foundations, part of the dynamic is this tension between trying to be a strategic, professionally staffed, thoughtful foundation that's advancing a set of long-term strategies, but then also dealing with the family dynamics of new generations coming on board. They're having a different set of interests than perhaps the previous generation had. For those of us in staff roles, how you sort of balance that dynamic. And I think what this structure has allowed us to do is to say, let's focus Barr on being that strategic philanthropic organization that is sort of unencumbered by those dynamics. So obviously there's a board that will make decisions and will set priorities, and that board may include family members, and that will be a rich and important set of conversations to have. But then separate from that, there will be other vehicles that will permit the family to pursue the interests that are their passions. It may not be their parents' passions, maybe their own passions and their own family's passions. And I think that's been a unique structure that is allowing us to organize Barr the way that we're organizing it, but also permitting the family to exercise its own philanthropic impulse in other ways.
The truth is that we were kind of on a track in the Barr Foundation that we'd started just before that trend of spending out. And so it was a little bit hard not to, we weren't at a strategic point that we could completely change or that felt comfortable to change. We have thought about it. There are also, when you have a husband and a wife, you're not always entirely aligned. And I think Amos felt a little more comfortable in the perpetuity. And so, but the way that has played out is that what we did was we left it very unrestricted in the future. So the next generation can change the strategies, can change the perpetuity, can do a spend out if they want to. What we are doing is trusting them to make the right decisions for their generation. We also, in this new phase of what Jim and I are beginning to work on, will allow us to, and my husband, coming from the investing world, is rigid on the 5%, because you care about that when you're investing money, and I can do better by investing this money than you can by giving it away at higher than a 5% rate, and we're protecting this. So it's a very call them traditional values, and important. But I think what gives us this new opportunity to work with some of the assets of the family that are at this point still outside of the Barr Foundation is the opportunity to do what we would call maybe special initiatives or legacy gifts, and to make much larger gifts and shorter term programs, in a 10-year span, to commit much more ambitious sums to specific topics that have a beginning and an end. So that's kind of more fun, and that's the fun we're looking forward to. Are your excuse me, are your children in their 30s or 40s or 20s and 30s? Yeah. So it's interesting because I think the most important thing when you have children that are growing up in this kind of wealth, number one, is to let them define themselves outside of that wealth. I've said to each of them, the most important thing that you have to do in your life is to figure out who you are, which isn't always easy, to decide what you want to do professionally, and decide who you want to spend your life with. And the family is here, the wealth is there, the foundation is there, but it's not who you are, and it shouldn't affect your life, it shouldn't impact your life. I believed that by practicing philanthropy, we would be the role models that would enable them to step into it when they were ready. But it's a big question. I can't answer it yet because we've really protected them. We've spent a lot of time in the not-for-profits. And I remember Anne Hawley saying to me, you won't be able to do your job as the president of a foundation well until you've really spent time on this side of the fence. And she was always advocating that we roll up our sleeves and spend time. And I will never regret that. I still do it. I spent 10 years as the president of the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston. And it was a time where we took the museum from being, I don't know if any of you even know the museum. You do, yes. From being an incredible collection, collection amassed by Isabella Stewart Gardner in the early 20th century. She died in the 1920s, and the governance went into a very conservative protection of the collection. And the 10 years that I spent were all about revitalizing the museum and figuring out how to modernize the systems and put energy back into the museum and reinvent it in the way that Mrs. Gardner lived in the museum when she was there. Jim is actually a trustee of the Gardner now and is chairing the new strategic planning that we're undergoing. So and today the whole Me Too movement, I mean, it's, being involved in some of the institutions that are going through these incredible changes is important. How that has affected our decisions about governance at the foundation, I believe passionately in the right board and choosing your board carefully and aligning, I think thanks to Jim and the work that we've done on values and culture, that the most important thing is bringing people into the foundation that are very much aligned with our values, and I hope we've done that. I think the whole conversation about culture is another one that I have come to realize that the most important thing that we as founding trustees can do is, you can't control what's going to happen after you go, and I don't even believe we should try. You do want to know that the work is going to be impactful and they're and high quality. I mean, somehow I just don't want to be turning over in my grave thinking, what are those people doing? But I think the best and maybe the only way that we can do that right now is to establish the kind of culture in the organization that will sustain over time and over generations, that it will give people something to, I don't know, help me here, to emulate, to something palpable about what began.
Yeah, I mean, I come back, I use this term DNA a lot because I think about how the Barr culture is so much emblematic of who Barbara and Amos are as people. We talk a lot about humility as being one of the core sort of as kind of the core essence of the culture of the foundation. And as you all know, the inherent power dynamics in philanthropy make these institutions that are often not the most humble institutions. And they make them institutions where my personal belief, and I know Barbara and Amos share this, that you want people who are constantly thinking about how they can approach their work with humility, with curiosity, with a sense that they don't have all the answers and their role isn't to impose their answers on the community. So there's a lot of that that's very much in our culture, and the reality is we benefit hugely. Barbara alluded earlier to, Amos was going to do the investments and I was going to go upstairs and work on the foundations. She didn't mean upstairs in her home. She meant upstairs in an office building that we are all in together, where the family office is on the 3rd floor, the foundation's on the 4th floor. So the foundation staff has daily exposure to Barbara and Amos. I inherited a lovely tradition that we have during the winter where every Tuesday and Thursday we bring together the entire staff for soup and salad. And we eat together in a communal dining room. And it's just a great opportunity for us to not only have time together in a more informal way, but to have time with Barbara and Amos as well. And I think it's little things like that that I think very much get infused in the culture of the foundation and are very much, I think, part of the way we try to do our work. I want to say a word, though, about governance, because you spoke to this, and I want to touch on something that Barbara and Amos and I have talked about a lot. Barbara described earlier that the trustee meetings, when you only have 2 trustees, can really be a little bit odd in terms of the way they play out. If you imagine a staff of 25 people and 2 trustees, and you imagine a culture where you want everyone to participate in a trustee meeting, so they're not these kind of black box opportunities. It is a little strange that any little flinch is read. Well, gee, Amos seemed to kind of not pay attention during this part of the conversation, so he wasn't interested, and so we shouldn't do that program. And I would say, no, I don't think that's the conclusion we should reach. But part of it is bringing new trustees on as we think about how do you use that time most effectively. Something that we think about a lot is how do we structure time with our trustees in a way where we're engaged in what Dick Chait calls generative governance. You're engaged in having your board helping to shape the ideas and engaging them at the right moment in time in strategy development or even strategy thinking, if you will, so that you're getting their ideas earlier in the process rather than we all go to board meetings, and sometimes when you go to board meetings and you know that everything has been decided before you walked into the room and that the sole role of the board is to kind of sit there through pageantry and to vote on things that have already been decided, and then to have a glass of wine afterwards and to kind of call it a day. That to me is just absolutely deadly and boring, and why would you want to spend your time doing that? And I thought a lot at Irvine, and I think a lot at Barr, about how do we organize our time with the board so that the board feels that it added value in the context of the discussion, the staff feels that it walked away with ideas that it wouldn't have had otherwise, and yes, we deal with the business part of the meeting, but the business part of the meeting becomes something that's sort of secondary to the opportunities to engage generatively around ideas, around strategy, and around the kind of impact that we want to have. And that's very much the way that we've oriented our time. And I will say that inheriting what Barbara created at the Gardner in a very different setting, I've observed a board, I don't know what the board was like before, but I observe a board today that comes in, leans in, rolls up its sleeves, wants to help, and is very much part of how do you shape the future of the institution rather than feeling that it's kind of more of, again, that kind of pageantry that we do tend to see in trustee settings.
Thank you.
I don't know.
Thank you. We are so blessed at the Barr Foundation. We are so diverse. I don't know, Jim, if you can put numbers behind it, but we have this rich diversity of people that work at the Barr Foundation. And if there was ever a compelling reason to go out to organizations and say, please diversify your boards, please diversify your staffs, especially in the arts world and in the environment, when you see what comes from that, it's not just something we have to do, it's something that we should do and we can do, and it makes a better organization. So we did think very, very carefully about the board. Lee Pelton is an African American. Amos and I are Caucasian, and Jim is Latino. So we're doing okay. Sue Tierney is Caucasian. But as we add people, that will very, very much be on our minds in terms of the composition of the board so that we stay very diverse.
And 6 of the 7 most senior people in the foundation are people of color.
Yeah, I noticed that. It's 4 and 3 or something like that.
It's, in fact, each of our program directors are women of color. And so I inherited much of this, so I won't take credit for this deep commitment to diversity that's been played out, both in terms of staff, now in terms of board, and also in terms of the way we think about the program work that we do.
And does it carry over to your grants making, where you talk to the institutions you're providing grants to about their own diversity of staff and board?
It's such an interesting question because we're in this right now. So we collect data from our grantees about the demographic makeups of their staffs and boards. We've been collecting it for a number of years. We collect it on a voluntary basis. And we're starting to have a conversation about what are we doing with that data? And what kind of conversations is it engendering between our staff and the staff of grant seekers, often grant seekers before they're grantees? And how do we manage that in a way that isn't about our trying to dictate anything, but at the same time, if there's an organization that is committed to serving the diversity of Boston and its board is comprised of 90% white people, there's probably a conversation worth having about the ways in which they're authentically reaching in or representing the community. And I think we're trying to learn from one another. We're trying to learn from best practices that other foundations engage in, but it's a topic that is very much front and center for us.
Well, I mean, I think humility is something that was especially important to Amos and me, but it's also one of the reasons we almost forced Jim to come work for us, because he was on record and he talked about humility and philanthropy, and so there was a great resonance there. You all know what philanthropy is like. It's like its own planet. You know, you walk on water. You never say anything that's wrong. You get used to this universe that, because it has to do with grants, and people don't want you to see their weak or vulnerable sides. And so it became very important when you're building an organization that, you know, the staff not get lulled into thinking, really believing that they did walk on water and they were never wrong. So humility is a really important piece of the work in philanthropy.
And I think in terms of how it plays out, I think we have conscious conversations as a staff about how, when we're shaping initiatives, we are consciously engaging the voices of those we're trying to serve, how we maintain a sense of curiosity about the work that we're doing and not a sort of sense of certainty that we have all of the right answers. When we went through our strategic planning process a number of years ago, one of the things we did, because we didn't have a large board at that time, was we created advisory groups for each of the programs to bring in outside perspectives and voices in the shaping of those strategies, so it wouldn't be just a staff-driven enterprise. But it's very much at the heart of how we operate. And I'll just say, from a personal standpoint, Barbara said it nicely the other direction, but I just want to reflect it back. The reality is I was not looking for a job when this came to me, and I don't say that with a lack of humility. I say that simply because I was happy at the Irvine Foundation. It was a great place to be. I'm a native San Franciscan, so that was my home. The main reason that this opportunity became more and more compelling over time, and I think you probably see this in evidence today, is the personality of the two individuals who created the foundation. And the reality that this, as I described it earlier, is a singular opportunity, and I think it is, because it's the opportunity to help two individuals who have been enormously generous realize the full promise of their philanthropy. And when I think about it in that way, and when I think about the team working in that way, that is so profoundly exciting. And it's also a sense of helping, in essence, people to realize the full promise of what they would like to be able to contribute. And that's what made it compelling. And I think Barbara and Amos and I very much shared this sense of humility. And frankly, if this had been a set of donors that was very much about, we want big impact, and we want to do it now, and we want to be sure we can count every single dollar that we put to work, and if that was sort of the attitude, I can tell you that would have been the last thing of interest to me, and I frankly would not have been good at delivering on that kind of impact for those individuals.
Barbara, would you like to ask Jim any questions?
Well, I do have some questions for Jim, and we've sort of covered some of them. One was the difference between your work with the Irvine Foundation in terms of governance, the Irvine Foundation board, which is more of a legacy board with no family engagement in it,
to the, your experience with us?
I think we largely covered it, and I
Yeah.
would just come back to this issue around generative governance being something that I think has been a binding characteristic for both of those as we think about the work that we're doing together at Barr. But I think we've covered a lot of.
Do you want to say anything about the strategic communications? That's something
Yeah, I
that
will
you
say
probably
a word
have.
about that, and then we can open it up to broader Q&A. This is a foundation that was born, as we said, in anonymity, and so thinking a lot about this question of humility. We want the foundation to be humble. We want the foundation to be under the radar, in essence, to put the work that we're supporting out front. But balancing that with the reality that as a philanthropy, you have many different tools at your disposal to have impact. The principal tool is your financial resources, of course. But I think a lot of foundations forget that there are other tools that they can bring to their work. So for example, foundations have a unique opportunity at times to convene people from different kinds of backgrounds, different sectors around issues of shared interest. It's pretty rare, and I say this with humility, but it's pretty rare that if I ask somebody to meet with me or ask somebody to come to a meeting that they're going to say no, because they see it as an opportunity to perhaps help shape the way Barr's thinking about an issue, or they may see it as an opportunity to generate resources for their organization. And so that's a powerful lever to be able to pull, but I think one that used judiciously is an important role for foundations. But I think another important role for foundations, and I think this was particularly the case for Barr, is that foundations can play an important role if they think about how they deploy strategic communications to advance the issues that they care about. And when I say strategic communications, I'm not talking about a website or an annual report or my being on Twitter. What I mean more is how the foundation helps to shape understanding of an issue that it's working on. How the foundation is helping to frame a conversation about a critical challenge in a community. So to give you an example, a number of years ago, we decided that one of the critical issues in Boston is the ongoing development of our waterfront. So for those of you who know the history of Boston and the cleanup of the Boston Harbor, and then so obviously huge success in cleaning up the Boston Harbor, then a major project, which thank you, all of you paid for it, called the Big Dig, a major project that then submerged an elevated highway, and by submerging that highway, opened up the city to its waterfront, to its now clean waterfront. And what we saw was there was a lot of development that was taking place, and the question we were asking is, as we develop that waterfront, which is important to do, how are we being attentive to issues of access? How are we being attentive to issues of mobility, ways people move around? How are we being attentive to the importance of keeping our city resilient with sea level rise, and the storms that we've experienced in Boston this year actually demonstrate that? And so we really stepped into this and became an advocate, became a voice asking questions about the future of our waterfront. And frankly, kind of drew some pushback from the city, drew pushback from developers who felt we were being anti-development. Our intent in doing this was not to get into a fight with anybody. Our intent was to elevate the conversation so that the city could be asking itself questions about what do we want, what do we aspire to for the future of Boston's waterfront. That is not traditionally a role that Barr played. It's not traditionally a role that foundations play, but I would say that when you're strategic about the way you bring your voice to something, I think a foundation can have impact. This is a story that's still in process, but I think it's a place where we realize the power of communications. And Barbara may want to add to this because it's an issue that she and Amos are passionate about.
Well, it's an issue that we're very passionate about, and it's taken us into this whole new area of work. Thankfully, feeling very safe because of Jim's real skill in communications and working with communications. But we're working with the city, so we're working with them. We're automatically put into partnerships with the city. And we're learning that how tricky and difficult that work can be. City administrations work on very short-term goals, and they're all based on re-election. So if you're coming into a re-election season, you lose their attention. If you're not, that's time to zoom in. I think you all have experienced the development boom from and it's been going on here for quite some time because there's building all over the city. Boston is into a big boom right now, so it reminds me of the Big Dig, because in the Big Dig, you could look around Boston and see more of those gigantic cranes than they said were in Hong Kong. And we're beginning to feel like that. There's buildings going up everywhere, and so this one little piece of that turf that we felt was so important was the Boston Harbor. There's no place that should be more accessible to the people of the city. Buildings go up, buildings are forever. That's scary, that, you know, if it goes up and it's not a good one, or if it goes up and it blocks access to the waterfront, or if it goes up and it's ugly, it's up. It's not going to come down. And so how could we use our voice to rally a constituency that doesn't really know how to push back against the city? That may overstate what we're doing. You know, we're sort of heading into those a little bit dangerous waters. It's been interesting, I hope impactful, but we all feel very passionate about the waterfront and how important it is to preserve it.
Have you been forming any alliances with the Boston Foundation on any of these
Yes,
things?
we have.
You found it helpful?
And Jim should speak to that. Yeah.
I mean, we are fortunate, as I think Paul has spoken to this group in the past. Paul Grogan, who's the president of the Boston Foundation, deserves enormous credit for turning that foundation, which was a very effective community foundation, into much more of a leadership voice, an institution that convenes people. He's been, in some ways, TBF, the Boston Foundation, has become a model for the way community foundations think about their community leadership role, more than just being a collection of donor-advised funds and maybe providing services to their donors. So TBF is a great model nationally, and I was well aware of that before I even came here. And the Boston Foundation has been a great partner to us across all of our areas in arts and education. They're actually looking more and more at the role they might play on climate issues, so we've been staying close on that. But they've been a terrific partner, and we benefit hugely from their, from also their connection to so many other donors and the opportunity to learn and to engage others in many of the issues that we're working on.
Given when I knew what your program areas were, I assumed that was the case. But it is. Paul has been here before, and he's actually coming back next year for another visit, because the scene continues to change.
It does.
And the kinds of involvements that they've been engaged in continue to be relevant. So, and those of you, I think the Boston Foundation, before Paul got there, took the lead in cleaning up Boston Harbor, if I remember.
They did play an important role.
Right.
They did.
But that means, but you don't do it just once. You have to do it repetitively.
So we definitely looked at a lot of other foundations in our strategic planning. We weren't as focused on the culture. The culture is, it's sort of dawning on me right now that how important this is, and it's really based on our organization and our family and our values as we articulate and get very comfortable with them. You might be able to talk about other cultures and other foundations that are more like ours. I don't.
I think one of the things that I think codifying as much as we could. I think what I realized when I arrived was that the foundation, I think, had implicit values and implicit approaches in terms of how it worked, but nothing had been really codified and expressed. And so that process of working with Barbara and Amos to say, what are the values of this foundation? And then, and we haven't talked about this, the process of having Barbara and Amos share those values with the staff directly and have that come from their voice and in their expression, that was hugely powerful for the staff. Because of the culture of humility that we have, it's pretty rare. Barbara and Amos don't come and make pronouncements, don't come talk to us. I mean, we engage with them, but this is not a setting where that's the way we function. And so it's rare when we have an opportunity to hear directly from Barbara and Amos on something that they care deeply about. And that values discussion was really important in that respect. And I think from when you look at other companies, they will often refer back to, say, culture moments. And that's a moment that now 4 years later, people refer back to constantly. And my guess is it will be one of those moments that will continue to kind of live on in the way that the foundation clarified and then publicly expressed, as was referred to earlier, publicly expressed these values. The other important thing to say is that when we talked about what was sort of inviolate in terms of the future of the foundation. We've talked thus far about trustees can make whatever decisions they want about the programs in the future. They can make whatever decisions about geographic focus. They can even make the decision to spend down the foundation. The one thing that we have asked, and we've not put this in any kind of documents, but we've asked explicitly, is we really hope that the values that have been expressed are values that will live on throughout the future of this foundation. I mean, that's the one hope, and I think that speaks to how powerful those are in terms of the way we want to do our work.
Yeah, well, I mean, we can name the values, and then maybe we can talk a little bit about leadership. So let's see if I get it. Risk became, we wanted to be risk takers. We wanted to not be afraid of risk. We wanted excellence. We wanted to work on a long time frame. We wanted to be long-term thinkers. We wanted to be curious. We always wanted an element of curiosity in the foundation. And we wanted, what did I miss?
Humility?
Humility, we've
we
talked
talked about.
about. Excellence, we named.
leaders,
And
invest
then
in leaders.
leadership, and then investing in leaders. And I think I would only say in terms of leadership that that's one of the greatest privileges of our work, is that whether you are engaging with a big NGO or a gigantic charity, or President Obama was in our office recently, or you are working with somebody who's done a grassroots startup in the environmental field, the common denominator is leaders, and it's the greatest privilege to be meeting the kind of people. And the people that are in the grassroots and the startups are some of the greatest leaders in our city. And we didn't talk about the Barr Fellows program today, but that's, I think, one of the things that we do that's really focused on leadership is awarding almost biannually a class of 12 leaders in the not-for-profit community a sabbatical. It's actually a 2-year program, but it's a 3-month sabbatical. It's awarded to 12 fellows, and it gives them a 3-month sabbatical. There's a learning journey, which we call a disruptive experience, that's somewhere across the world. It's capacity building for their organization, leadership coaching for them. Basically, at the end of the day, it's to say thank you, and our hope is to recharge them so that they stay in the community and continue to be great leaders, and we don't completely wear them out. So that's a good example of the importance.
Thank you, that's interesting. Yes?
You mentioned that you've given your new trustees a lot of flexibility, and generations down, they have flexibility to change programming. Do they have the flexibility to change your mission and focus areas? And do you have anything built in your indenture or trust, like the Z. Smith Reynolds, to come back and get them, and if they do something you don't like, shut it down? I love that provision.
You want to do that? You
No,
do
go
that.
ahead. You go ahead. It's pretty straightforward.
We've left all that flexibility. Now, our current trustees, as long as we're in the room, I think we could probably talk them back off the shelf. But the trustees in the future, I think that I think if they needed to change the mission, they could change the mission. We have the luxury of changing our mind about all of that between now and whenever we get hit by the bus. but that's the plan now, is to really trust the future. Yeah.
Cam, did you have something?
I do. At Duke, we talk a lot about next generation philanthropy, and we have stood up a couple of family philanthropy programs, and Joel was an early advisor on that. And what our alumni and some parents said is that everybody does a pretty good job of getting the money ready for the kids. Nobody gets the kids ready for the money.
So
Great one.
true.
Listening to you talk about your walking into the foundation world and kind of bumping along without experience, do you have thoughts about how to help your children maybe get the jump start so that maybe they don't stumble, or do you want them maybe to? Is that a good way to learn, to stumble through?
Well, it isn't a bad way to learn. I will say that. I probably could have shortened my learning curve a little bit, but it's your mistakes are are the best things you can do. So the failures are important. You're reminding me, maybe I should have Jim put our failures up on the website.
You don't have any
We have, we've got some.
I think we're back to with the kids. People do it all different ways. Some families hand them, expense accounts or allowances or something, and I have always felt the best way is just to be a good role model until we get them through this. I mean, we have 2 daughters who were married last year, and we have 2 daughters who are expecting their first children now. So we went from a family of 5, a tight family of 5, to a family of 7, and now all of a sudden the next generation is here, and it's happening so quickly. And so we're thinking about, these new son-in-laws and how do we bring them into this, and it's all kind of just happening right now. Our kids have an open invitation to the Barr Foundation meetings. We have mixed results. They're not in Boston. It's hard for them to get away from their jobs. We don't put a burden on them. I think really important for us is that we don't feel this is a burden, that we can bring them into it in a very natural, organic way. There's a place for them if they want it. There's leadership opportunity if they choose it. But we don't want wealth and philanthropy to ever bring the family down. The most important thing is the family and their happiness and the relations in the family. So.
I imagine it's also tied to those values.
Very tied to the values, yeah. Mm.
Any other urgent questions? Okay, you get the last one.
Okay. I was curious if we could, because this was our topic in class today with Professor Fleischman, talk a little bit about when you're emphasizing putting in a culture of rigor and excellence, how you think about evaluation across your different impact areas, and the challenges you face, and then how you address those challenges.
So I'll take this one because we just came out of a trustee meeting last week on this very topic. We hired our first full-time director of learning and evaluation last September, Yvonne Belanger, who came to us from the Gates Foundation. So had experience in obviously a much larger setting doing a lot of this work. And it was the product of a pretty exhaustive search that we did. And even in titling that role, Director of Learning and Evaluation, we wanted to obviously put the accent on learning. That the way we think about evaluation is how does evaluation help us to be more effective in terms of our strategies as a foundation? How does evaluation serve our grantees in terms of their learning and their ability to improve the work that they're doing? I mean, Barr is not unique in this respect. Many foundations have embraced that kind of learning frame. We are definitely not a foundation that is on the metrics bandwagon as it comes to saying we will only make grants for things that we can measure. We realize, and it was referenced earlier, in the arts and creativity area, there are things that we can measure, but our focus on arts and creativity is very much a demonstration as well about our values and what we think is critical to a well-functioning society and democracy, and the power of the arts to bring people together, to help educate us, all of those things. So I would say that we're early in that journey right now. Yvonne just shared with the trustees a framework for how we'll be thinking about ramping up this work, but in a gradual and incremental way. This isn't about, okay, now we're going to start doing evaluation everywhere at Barr. It's rather, the mantra we have is we monitor comprehensively. That is, when we make a grant, we have a shared set of objectives and we monitor those. We get reports, we talk to our grantees about them. So we monitor comprehensively, but we evaluate selectively. So the idea of then putting evaluation rubrics or having an outside evaluator come in, it's not something that we're going to do across all of our grants, but in selected ways, particularly if we have initiatives or clusters of activity that are around shared objectives, that might be a place where it makes sense to have an evaluator come in, not just to help us understand impact, but also to do that formative work where people are learning as they're doing the work.
Okay, we're out of town now, but if Jim or Barbara, if either of you has a closing statement that you'd like to make or important points you want to make before we close, feel free to do so now. But if you don't, that's okay too.
Well, I would just say thank you, and it's thank you for listening to us. I wish we had more of an opportunity to hear what you're doing and what your interests are, and if you're ever in Boston, please come and visit us.
Well,
We'd love to see you.
I just have to say that you are a really great advocate for your kind of philanthropy. You
Oh,
do a
thank
beautiful
you.
job.
Thank you.
genuineness of your philanthropy is obvious.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you, Tom.
Appreciate it.
I can't add to that, Tom, so thank you.
Well, let me thank all of you all for coming. Let me thank Barbara and Jim for coming and sparking this discussion. I thought it was really fascinating. And it does, I echo what Tom Lambert just said. He's had a lot of experience with philanthropists over the years, and he knows what he speaks the truth.
Oh, thank you.
He has a truth meter in him. Doesn't permit him to exaggerate. But I really enjoyed it and learned a lot as well.